So I am here with Christine Miller from Nothing New Press. And Christine, I don't know if this is going to come out right or not, but I feel like I'm sitting here talking with someone who has been around the block in homeschooling. You're like one of the ancient wise leaders. That didn't come out right. Well, you've just been homeschooling such a long time and writing about to homeschoolers and making textbooks for homeschoolers. You are the first website I found you on. I know where we lived because we lived out in the middle of the Navajo reservation. I didn't know a soul in real life that homeschooled, and I felt so lonely. And I found your classical Christian homeschool, classical Christian, how was it? Homeschooling.org, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember I went through every single page of that site. I printed it all. I put it in a binder. I absorbed it. And then I bought All Through the Ages, which was probably one of the older editions of that too, because I'm dating myself. That was around the year 2002. And I know that's when I found you because I just remember where I was sitting. I remember feeling so alone. And anyway, at that point, we had been homeschooling for a couple of years. My son was probably in second grade. And my friend and I had gone to a bunch of conferences in Florida. Before we moved out there, we lived in Florida. And we went to the great big homeschooling conference in Florida and absorbed speakers like Herzog, what's her name? Joyce Herzog and Ruth Beechick. I bought every one of her books. And I had been getting Sunlight catalogs since like 1995, and I would highlight them all up. I still have my original Sunlight catalog because I just loved looking through all the book lists. Honey for a Child's Heart was, I had 100 easy lessons for teaching your child to read, or I think that's what it's called. And just all these old timer things. I'm an old fart too. So my point being, I never dreamed I would be sitting here talking to you in person, like knowing you as a real human being. I'm your friend. And I'm like, wow, that's Christine Miller. I can't believe I'm doing this. So Christine, you were like up there on a pedestal because you knew what you were talking about with homeschooling. And I'd read all 6 volumes of Charlotte Mason's books. And when I read your website, it like, ding, that's it. And it really, really had a huge influence on me. And obviously because of that, now that I write curriculum, it has an influence on everything I write. So, and besides the fact that we talk a lot. So Christine, I wanted to see if we could get your ear on the heritage that we have as homeschoolers and some of the history behind it, because we have a lot of moms that are brand new to homeschooling. They've maybe a lot of people, because of COVID, they brought their kids home and they didn't want their child to sit in front of a Zoom camera all day long. And they thought, you know what, I could do this better. And a lot of people came to Torah in the last year. They were home, they had time to read their Bibles. And so we have people that are listening that don't know some of this history, this rich privilege and liberty that we have that has not always happened. And I was just wondering if you could share some of that with them and let them know the path we've taken.
Okay. Well, I just want to start with me as a little girl. It was in the 1960s, and I had read the Little House on the Prairie books. And I remember telling the Lord that, so Mrs. Ingalls homeschooled the girls before they had the school built.
Right.
And I remember telling the Lord, I want to do that with my children. You know, I was 8 years old or something, and I promptly forgot about it. I grew up, I went to school. I had my career path planned out. I got married. I started having kids. And when I had just started homeschooling, the Lord had reminded me of that prayer that I prayed when I was a little girl. I'm like, I'm doing it. It's happening.
Exactly.
So that was in the 60s. Now we're going to jump ahead. I'm going to tell this a prayer meeting on Mars Hill. Is it a good time for that?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic story.
I started homeschooling in 1987. It was not legal in our state. There were only a few states in the United States, where it was legal at that time, people that I knew were going to jail because their children weren't in school, parents. And so this was a real thing where people were putting their lives on the line to not, and to have Child Protective Services come and try and take away your kids because they accuse you of neglect because you were homeschooling and they weren't in the public school. I mean, that happened in the 1980s for a lot of people. So this, let's see, what was the year that this took place in? This took place in,
I want to say 1982.
1982.
Do you want to know where I was in 1982?
Where?
I was in second grade in Michigan. And in Michigan, Christian schools were really strong, and pastors were being thrown in prison for opening Christian schools. So very much the same battle.
Wow. Well, in 1982, my oldest child was born in 1983. So I just felt like, homeschooling wasn't really talked about yet, but it was something that I wanted to do. What was being talked about was why Johnny can't read, the new math. I have a younger sister who is quite a bit younger than I am. I'm one of the oldest, and she's the youngest in our family. And when I was having my children, she was in elementary school and in junior high school, and they were doing the new math and all the experimentation that they did on kids. When I went through public school, they weren't really doing that yet in the area where I was. I was lucky. I got a good education. I was taught to read by phonics. We had great books, literature, and real mathematics and all this kind of stuff. So I learned, my little sister, by that time, they were doing all the experimental academics and everything else. And so, the failure of the public school education was a big topic, but homeschooling wasn't a big topic yet. So in 1982, a man named, Scott Bryce, I believe is his name, had kids who were going on a youth with a mission trip to Europe. And his oldest son was one of the kids. And he had signed up to pray for a certain amount of time every day for the kids on this youth with mission trip. And the Lord started telling him, I'm going to tell some background and then I'm going to read his essay about it. The Lord started telling him that he was supposed to go and meet up with these kids. And he didn't have the money. He didn't have the airfare. He didn't have, there was nothing. And the Lord, put him through a series of divine encounters where airplane tickets and money and everything he needed to actually do what the Lord was telling him to do got dropped into his lap. And so let's see. So he flew to London, then to Spain. He stayed with the YWAM kids for a couple of days. On Saturday, he went to meet with the YWAM Mercy Ship, which was in Athens, Greece. He asked two of his friends who were part of the ministry team on the ship to pray with him about why he was going there. God had told him to go to meet with the kids in Europe and then go on to Athens. And God was doing all kinds of miracles to get him there, but he still didn't know why. Why was he there? When they began to pray, God spoke to him. When you study, this is what he says the Lord told him, when you study the history of education, where do you always start? He answered, with the Greeks. That's right, but the Greeks aren't the foundation of education. I am. Tomorrow morning, go to Mars Hill, which in the shadow of the main altar of Greek antiquity, the Acropolis, and tear it down in the spirit, because I am the foundation of education, not the Greeks. That's what the Lord told them. So they prayed about who was supposed to go. God gave them Acts 13, 1 through 1, which was 5 prophets and teachers. in Acts 13:1. So 5 of them got together in the morning and went to the Acropolis for a prayer meeting. While they were there, Paul says in his story, or Paul, this is the name of the man who this happened to. They turned to the east and the north and the west and the south and prayed for the release of biblical Christian education around the world. They turned to the east and the north and the west and the south and prayed for the release of teachers into Christian education all over the world.
Biblical Christian education.
Biblical Christian education. So that prayer meeting on Mars Hill, in which 5 prophets and teachers prayed for the release of teachers into biblical Christian education all over the world, took place just before the Christian homeschooling movement took off in the United States. If you are a Christian homeschooler, you are part of the answer to that prayer. So they double-checked their facts with the Homeschooling Defense Association about the history of homeschooling. They point to April of 1982 as the start, when Dr. James Dobson had Dr. Raymond Moore on his Focus in the Family radio program.
And who's Dr. Raymond Moore? I know, but can you tell our listeners?
I cannot. You'll have to say the name of the book. I can't remember the name of the book.
I don't know if I can remember the name of the book, but he was so influential. I've been reading his books just this last summer. Not his books. He has a bunch of articles online on phonics, for instance, but he was very much a firm believer in scripture only. And I
think he wrote one of the very first books on home education.
I think so.
Back in the day, in 1982. That was the time when Dr. James Dobson had Dr. Raymond Moore on his radio program. That was the time when the Christian homeschooling movement began to grow rapidly. This was less than a year after the prayer meeting on Mars Hill. When Paul was flying back home, God told him that the 2-hour prayer meeting on Mars Hill was the only reason he had sent him to Athens.
Yeah.
Was it really that important? He asked. Yes, it was really that important. I got to move this. Hang on. If you are a Christian homeschooler, let me encourage you with this. In the summer of 1981, God sent a teacher with Youth with a Mission halfway around the world to pray to release you to provide your children with a Christian education, and what you are doing is important to him.
Amen. Christine, tell us about Mars Hill. Why was that so significant? Why did it have to be there and not just here?
Well, in the New Testament in Acts, when Paul went to Athens and he saw an altar that says "to an unknown God," and he stood up on Mars Hill, because Mars Hill is where the Acropolis was, which is, so in Athens there is I don't want to call it a mountain because it's got a flat top. But it was a bluff, and it overlooked the city. And in the ancient days, on those high points is where they always put the fortress for the city. So if the city was ever attacked, everybody would run up to the strong point of the city and take defense. And it was also where they put their temple to their main idol that they worshipped. And the Acropolis is a temple to Athena. Athena was the patron goddess of Athens, the goddess of wisdom, she's called. And on that Acropolis, on that high point where the temple was, is where they had the forum, and everybody, who was a teacher or a philosopher or a scientist or something, you could go to the forum and take a stand on one of the corners or one of the porticos and tell your deal. This is my philosophy, this is my teaching, this is my new discovery in science, and people would gather around and listen to you. And when Paul went to Athens, when he saw the altar to an unknown God, he went to that spot, which was Mars Hill, where everybody met, and he preached about Yeshua to the Greeks of Athens. And, some of the Greeks mocked him, it says in Acts, but others said, we will hear you again about this. And so that was the start of his ministry to Athens. But it was also the time in history where Hebrew monotheism and truth and biblical truth smacked into Greek philosophy and idolatry head on. And Greek philosophy and idolatry was the norm of the world back in those days. The world might have been under the Roman Empire, but it was the Greek culture that was the normal culture of society. And that's where they met, and that's where the Hebrew worldview overcame the Greek worldview.
And we are so Greek still today, so Greek. When I have a book called Biblical Home Education, and we go through Greek thought and we show how it is pagan idolatry and how it's evident in our educational systems. So when the Father took this man to Mars Hill and said, tear it down, and he's calling to the four winds to say, bring my people back, bring them truth. Oh, that's just exciting.
Yes. And so then I started homeschooling in 1987. That's when my oldest was 5 and she was in kindergarten. And in our state, homeschooling was not legal yet, and people with older children were going to jail. But the compulsory age for your child to attend public school was 7 at the time. So we figured we had 2 years. She was 5. We were like, we've got 2 years to figure this out.
Wow.
By the time she turned 7, HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, worked with the legislatures of all 50 states to pass homeschooling legislation to allow parents to homeschool their children. And it had just passed the summer in our state, the summer before she turned 7. So I never faced jail or anything else. I just faced,
that odd family that homeschools that weird family over there.
You're gonna ruin that little girl. Why are you doing this kind of thing, Now, back in those days, today we have curriculum options. I mean, holy cow, out just hundreds of thousands of curriculum options. Back in those days, there wasn't. There was a Becca. There was Bob Jones was still being written. It wasn't, right. I don't think it was widely available yet.
I don't think so. And did Becca sell to homeschoolers at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if they did at the beginning, but by the time I was homeschooling mine, they had started. However, I didn't want to do a Becca because I didn't want to replicate school in a building at home.
Why not?
I hadn't read anything by John Taylor Gatto. He hadn't received the Teacher of the Year award yet.
Right.
But school in a building, where you're in a class for 45 minutes and then the bell rings and you go on to something else and then the bell rings and you go on to something else. It just wasn't Little House on the Prairie education, even one-room schoolhouse education.
No, definitely not.
No. And I mean, I hadn't remembered that I had prayed and asked the Lord, told the Lord that I wanted to do that, but I still had that one-room schoolhouse mentality from all the history and everything that I had read, which was a lot growing up. And to me, that just seemed normal. It seemed, it produced the previous generations of all the devastatingly, excellently educated people in our history and in our background. You know, you see these, back in those days, you'd see this list of what 8th graders in Kansas were learning in, 1872 or something, and what 8th graders in Kansas are learning today. And the difference was just jaw-dropping, astounding. And I was real close with my grandpa growing up. My grandpa was born in 1900. And, my mother was a late baby for them. And then and then she had children a little later in life. So for me to have grandparents that were born in 1900, I mean, that seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't that, it worked out. But anyway, I was really close to my grandfather, and he had gone through this education that was so vastly different from what I had gone through. And my education was good, and from what my little sister had gone through. And I'd love to hear him talk about the way it used to be, and so I had all of this background and this idea in my head of the way it is now isn't the way it's supposed to be, and I just didn't want to do it. I read, the year before I started homeschooling was my introduction to Ruth Beachick. I read the 4 through 8 book first.
Wow.
Which encouraged me that, she spends a lot of time in that book telling homeschool parents, you can do this. There's, I know educators try and act like they're professionals and don't try this at home. Well, they are professionals, but they're professional in a certain mindset and worldview of how to teach. And it's not necessarily what's best for the kids, And then I found her other books, the K through 3 books, which helped me. So I read her. The very first homeschool conference I went to in Denver happened to be the very first homeschool conference that Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis did in the United States after he immigrated here from Australia. And his ministry wasn't called Answers in Genesis back then. I don't know what it was called. I can't remember.
I don't either.
But he hadn't even broken off from the Australian creation movement yet, and I mean, I remember him talking about Genesis and the validity of Genesis and how we can trust the biblical Genesis as the biblical foundation of not only the Bible, but of history. And I mean, I bought as many of the books on his table as I could. One of the first ones I bought was After the Flood, which I had finished. I did all my workshops during the day, went back to my hotel room and read those books until like 2 or 3 in the morning.
I believe you.
I finished that book by the end of the weekend, and all these things played such a huge role in shaping my homeschool philosophy, which was you can do it. God's called you to. God has appointed parents the primary educators of their children. This is a biblical mandate, and he's equipped you to do these things, and it's all going to be okay. And I didn't want to do a Becca, but I stumbled on Charlotte Mason several years later and got totally enamored with the whole living books approach and the Charlotte Mason approach, and because I felt that's how I wanted to learn. That's how I did my best learning, and that's how I wanted my children to learn. I wanted them to grow up loving learning instead of despising having to do school, which so many kids, they enter public school and kindergarten and, oh my gosh, they're so raring to go. They're so excited to go learn. And by the time they're in 3rd grade, they're just like, do I have to,
Yeah, it's true. And a lot of these parents that are getting started, Christine, that's what their kids are coming home and they already feel that way. They've been in public school and they already hate learning. And so we've got discouraged parents that are how do I give that love back?
So when I was going through public school myself, the subject that I hated the worst was history, which, I mean, so we had to have a year of American history in order to graduate. My high school history teacher was the wrestling coach. And you know how he did his lectures? Here's our history textbook. And he read the chapter in the history textbook in a monotone, just like this. And all the kids were sitting in their desks going, I can't believe I have to sit here for 45 minutes. And, I did not want, I was starting to realize that history was important, and that with Genesis, the foundation, there was a lot of history and science there that even though the world had attacked the biblical foundation, there was a lot of history and science there that upheld it, and I wanted my children to love learning about history because they read Little House on the Prairie, and because of these living books instead of a textbook monotone. So I didn't want to do a textbook. And anyway, so what was the question you just asked me? I can't remember.
Well, just how to get them to love it. So I grew up, again, I'm a little bit younger than you. I'm probably closer to the age of your younger sister. And my Christian school that I graduated from, we used some of these other textbooks that you didn't want to use. And I found them okay, but I didn't understand how any of it applied to my life. None of it applied to my life. And Christine, it was when you started writing about history, we got all through the ages, and we would get books from that you would recommend for my oldest son. He was starting to learn to read, and we would read them aloud. And then you started blogging about history and where it was in scripture and how the Bible was accurate and true. And it was like light bulbs turned on, and that was what made it come alive for me. And hopefully I've passed that on to my kids. And just the fact that, oh my word, this is real. Like I used to pray when I was a little girl. I used to hide in the back of my closet and pray. And I would tell God, I don't understand why those people in the Bible are so important that they got to have their name in the Bible. And we're not that important. There hasn't been any new Bible written for thousands of years now. That's how this little kid thinking. And I guess we're just not as important. And then when you started writing about history and where we are today in history, and like we're in the Bible, and I won't go down that rabbit trail now. But my point being, all of a sudden I'm like, what? We're in the Bible? And then I would I've got to read history. I've got to find out. I don't know it. And yeah, anyway, it just made it. So it coming alive for you, and you deciding to use living books has filtered down. It's crazy.
Wow. That's great. Because so when I discovered H.A. Gerber's narrative histories, I found one of them in the back of my library. I went to the library every week. We had a regular library day. I had a list of books. All Through the Ages wasn't a thing yet. I had these handwritten lists that I was constantly writing and adding to as I found new books and things like that. And I would take it to the library every week, and we'd come home with a big stack of books. And not only once my kids could read on their own, they did their own reading. They always had a stack of books that they were supposed to be reading on their own, that wasn't a part of the lessons or anything else. Although I always made sure they tied in with whatever it is. But then we also had books that we read out loud and as a family. And then the youngest, I would read books to her before she could read them on her own. So that's pretty much. But when I discovered that first H.A. Gerber book, and I think it was the start of the 13 Colonies, might have been. But I would read a couple of chapters to my kids every day, and that was our history. And they loved it. And on days when they were sick and we didn't have school, they would be like, we were afraid to tell you we were sick, Mommy, because we didn't want to miss history today. I'm like, wow, I've got to get these books back in print for homeschooling moms, because if your kids will tell you that, then You know, this is not like your high school wrestling teacher reading you the textbook in monotone.
And my favorite part of school as a little girl was when the teacher would read to us after lunch. And I had it in my head that I want to read aloud to my kids. And it's just, a parent can make it come alive. You have all these funny stories that you can talk about together that you remember. Did you remember in that book when that happened? You know, but Christine, I get asked this question. I'm not kidding. It's got to be weekly. How do you know if your kids are learning if all you're doing is just reading books together? Okay. I mean, I know you know they're learning, but how? How do you make it? How do you prove to the government that you're actually doing school?
Okay, well, we happen to live in a state where we didn't have to turn in a report. But I realize there's states like that. And if you have your list of books that you can check off that your children have learned, that you have read to your children or that they have read, you can put that in your report and it's evidence, okay, to the state. One thing that I learned early on was that tests were for the parents. So if you administer a test to your child, that doesn't actually teach your child anything.
No.
The reason that teachers started doing tests was so that they could tell the parents, your child has learned this, that, or the other thing. You know, they can put it down in their report that the child has learned this objective, that objective, and the other objective. So what if you don't have to do that reporting? One of the things that I did with my kids when we were doing living books, when they were in the elementary grades, is we just talked about what we were reading. We discussed it. You know, Dad would come home from work and we'd have dinner around the table and he'd say, "What did you learn today, kids?" You know, and we'd start talking about the chapters that we'd read, you know, me and the kids, and they would chime in. And, you know, I mean, that to me was the best way of knowing that the kids had heard what was being said. Now, with my youngest daughter, she probably had the highest IQ of anybody in our house. And when she learned to read, she picked it up really fast. And I would give her, seriously, I'm not kidding, as a second grader, I would give her a stack of books like this, and they'd be at a 6th grade level. And I'd give her 6 books to last her from one library day to the next. And she got through them all before the next library day. Right. One of the biggest challenges I had was keeping that girl in books.
Yes.
You know, because she was going through them. And I would, you know, I'd open a book to the back that she said, "I finished this one." And I'd say, "What happened after this? What about this?" You know, I'd start asking her questions about the plot of the book, thinking that she just skimmed it and didn't really read it. You know, she read it. She could answer every question. You know, but I mean, that's all the check really that you need.
So discussion. We're back at discussion again. Talking to our children when we walk, when we talk, when we stand up, when we sit down, and that's sufficient
for us to know.
Amen.
And I didn't do. To tell you the truth, I think we did math, multiplication table worksheets and that kind of thing when the kids were trying to learn their math facts, but I didn't have worksheets. I didn't do testing. Wow. I didn't do those. I did not do those things. I would have them copy. We did copy work.
So what does that look like for you when you did copy work?
Okay, well, so we would take a passage from one of the books we were reading, and I would print it on a piece of computer paper. I'd just take the paragraph or the couple paragraphs, whatever it was. And then they had composition books with the lined paper, and they had, or else notebooks, spiral books, whatever, it doesn't matter. And they would just copy. They would read off the paper that I'd given them and they would copy, or else they would read it from their book. and copy. We did things we were reading. We did important documents like the Constitution or Bible passages or speeches, the Gettysburg Address or whatever, anything that I could find. And I was constantly looking for these kind of things that I could find that they could copy. And then when they were older, when they had learned their spelling, particularly because I didn't like this trend they had then, and I think they still do it, where they encourage kids to write, even in kindergarten. What did you do on vacation this summer? They don't know how to spell, they don't know proper punctuation, grammar, or anything else. Well, okay, that's fine. But if you're going to ask a child, what did they do for vacation this summer? Ask them, have them tell you. Don't make them write when they don't know how to spell anything. That's just frustrating. I never liked that trend.
It's a really big trend right now. It's gotten bigger in just the last couple of years. The standards, California tends to lead the way in standards, and they have gone, yes, down to kindergarten. They should be writing. There are more standards for writing than any other subject right now in the United States. And I agree. The sponge has not been filled. How does it get squeezed out?
That's not true education.
No.
So yes, it's important to ask those questions of your kids, but have them answer you. They can speak to you verbally, so have them do that. And the writing, I think that kids should be doing at that age is phonics, penmanship, spelling words. That's enough writing for that age. When they get older, they can do diagramming, they can correct grammar, those kinds of things. And they can, and as they're learning to write their letters and to what the phonics rules are, maybe in second and third grade, they can start copying just your memory verse for that week. Give them one sentence to copy every day. And it can be from their reading, it can be from your memory verse, it can be from the Torah portion, it can be from wherever you're getting those positive, affirming, encouraging sentences from, and they can copy one every day. And when they're older, in third grade, in fourth grade, they can do paragraphs and maybe half a page or whatever, and then move them into dictation. And you start the same way. You dictate a sentence.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you dictation. You said it. See, again, back in the 80s and the 90s, we were taught what dictation, when I say we were taught, conference speakers and books that we would get, and that was pretty much the source of our education, would tell us to dictate. And the first time I heard that word, I did not know what it meant, Christine. So Can you explain that?
So copy work and dictation are pretty much two sides of the same coin. But in copy work, which is for younger grades, they copy, you've put in front of them something printed or something written, and they copy it. So they copy the capital letters, they copy the proper spelling, they copy where the punctuation goes. After they've gotten really good at that, you can move into dictation. So maybe fourth or fifth grade, the thing is you don't need to rush it, because children are where they are. And I know that there's guides and everything else out there that say, well, in fourth grade, they should be doing this. And in second grade, they should be doing this. Your child should be doing where he's at. He should be doing that thing. And that's the way one-room schoolhouses used to be back in the Laura Ingalls Wilder's day. How did the whole entire school go through the Webster's spelling book? There's no grade divisions. There's no, whether you were in eighth grade or whether you're in first grade, you started where you were and you went from there. Once you finished this lesson and learned it, then you went on to the next lesson, and it didn't matter how old you were.
Amen.
The exact same lesson that the second graders were doing, and who cares? They were started where they were at, and they learned, and that's the point. So with dictation, once the kids have learned their spelling, and you don't need to take 12 years to teach spelling rules to kids. I mean, that's something that educators have done to make an 8-hour school day a thing.
Otherwise, the
Seriously,
teacher had no idea what to do all day. They had to fill up this time.
they had to fill up time in order to justify having your child there for the majority of his waking hours and away from home. So anyway, once they're doing good at their copy work and they're doing good at their spelling, you move into dictation, which is you read something, a sentence from the Bible or a paragraph from the Declaration of Independence or whatever it is. You read it slow enough and they write what you're saying, and that's dictation. And you go slow enough so that they can catch everything. Don't rush that. That doesn't help anybody. But when they turn in their page, they're supposed to have put capital letters at the beginning of sentences and proper punctuation, as long as you spoke properly with your pauses and your periods and all that kind of thing. And you basically, if they've made any errors, you show them what their errors are, and in a very non-confrontational way, and they correct those things and turn it back in, and there you are.
And you're just comparing it to the original, so you don't have to know all the facts yourself. You just take the original and look at the two.
Now, all through elementary school, they haven't written a single original sentence out of their own head yet. I think that's very important. I think that's very important because you have to learn. I mean, if kids really want to, start writing stories in their bedroom or whatever, yes, let them do it. But for school, you're spending their writing time on grammar and spelling and fundamentals, so that when they do start writing on their own, they're thinking about logical thought processes and how to support their, how to support their theme sentence, their topic sentence of their paragraph or their essay. They're not still wrestling with, do I capitalize this or do I put a comma here? Those things, those are tools in their toolbox that they've already mastered, so that they can go on with their original writing. And in our homeschool, we did original writing in junior high and high school. And in junior high, 7th through 12th grades, secondary education, we started with paragraphs. We spent a whole year on just writing paragraphs. How do you write a proper paragraph? We moved on to half a page or a full page essay. And then we moved on to papers, so that by the 12th grade, they were doing research papers, which, kids don't learn how to do anymore. They go to college and they don't even know how to write a research paper, which is a problem. Learning to write a good research paper is a very excellent prerequisite for graduation, because you have to be able to think logically in order to do that. You have to learn how to use a library and how to use research journals and books, and you have to learn what evidence supports what assertions and all those kinds of things. I mean, kids shouldn't be going to college unless they've learned those things, and it's one of the problems with not only kids graduating from high school these days, but from colleges. People go to college, unless you're in a specific field like law or something, or science, they go through that whole university and they don't know the first thing about how to support anything that they assert. So then they get on social media and they make all these kind of crazy claims. And you're like, well, what source do you have for saying that? They don't even know what you're talking about.
Or we're just told to trust the science, and we haven't been taught how to think scientifically, how to use a scientific method. Science and history, that we can use the same process. You can start when they're little and they can go outside on a walk and they can draw a flower, and they can come back in with a field guide and compare their drawing. Well, actually, that's probably where they should start, was the field guide and tracing it. Then go find the flower, see if you can mimic it. And then, then you can, as they get older, learn how to dissect a flower, and then find out, label all the parts and memorize it, and find out why it works the way it works, and get into chemistry and just build step upon step, precept upon precept,
step upon step. And I think that nature study and identification like that is a key elementary age science study. Save the chemistry set experiments and all that for secondary, but and plus it's something that keeps, we were talking earlier about how do you keep your children interested in learning. Well, these are the kinds of things that they love to do.
Right. We always learn better when we take something we know and love, and we learn something new about it, rather than taking something we've never cared about in our life. It just happens to be chapter 6 in the textbook, so therefore we must study it today. It would be so much better if we could apply what we learned to things that, the chickens in the backyard and the goats that we get to see every day, and our friends. We can learn all kinds of biology there.
So I'm not quite sure how to do it with math. Math, you pretty much have to stick with the textbook, although I know you've got a Bible basis for your math, which I think is awesome and wonderful, because that pulls in, it brings math into our everyday thing that we're concerned about, and it doesn't just stay in a textbook.
I think to me too, the fun about math and making it apply to their lives, and my kids can tell you that we have a lot of stories about pizza in our house. Pizza, you can cut up into fractions, you can add, and we make homemade pizza. So you've got chances to do, add a cup of this and a tablespoon of that. And if we're going to multiply it, because we're having company now, how many tablespoons, and just doing it that way, then all the way up into algebra. To me, an algebraic expression is just going to the park with your kids. If you have an old-fashioned playground that has an old-fashioned seesaw on it, and daddy sits on one side and the little child on the other, they can quickly learn what an equation and inequality is. And then you can transfer things from one side to the other. And if you can just bring it down to the level of the child and say, where would this be in our house? Are we building a new shed in the backyard? Then let's learn perimeter. Let's learn area. Let's, trying to always put it in the way a child thinks, and not try to make it so complicated, because we really do use these things in life. We just don't know they're called that.
I still, even though I don't teach kids anymore because my kids are all grown up and they have families of their own, but I still use algebra every day when I'm, I've got these recipes that I used when we had 5 people at home, and now it's just me and my husband. And so I'm constantly having to have everything. And I use algebra every day still to do all that.
Amen. And then as you get into the high school level, now it's not so much about hands-on, but thinking abstractly, so we can learn, does something make sense? Is that even reasonable? So that when we get into social media later, we go, is that even reasonable? Is that make sense? And that's a lot of the logic, and the purpose of learning it is just to evaluate and go, and I don't think the world wants our kids to learn to think logically.
Well, why do you think that they've been messing with math education for 70 years to make it, not understandable? That's why. My husband and I we've talked about this several times before, but at some point, especially when Darwinism became the predominant theory in the world. So the theory of Darwinism says that everything new must always be better. And so here we are, Torah observant, and we're like, everything that's old is the best, But how that translates to what these people do with the education curriculums is they find something that works and they can't be happy with it. because something better is right around the corner. We got to keep fiddling with it. And that's why education is constantly changing. It's just an outgrowth of a Darwinistic worldview. Whereas people like us, we want to teach with phonics. We know that works. So, and we have respect for the ancient paths. We want to teach history. We want to teach Genesis. And we want to teach the things that have been proven over the test of time that work. And we're rejecting the modern newfangled. A lot of times, sometimes they come up with something that's better, but most of the time they use our kids for guinea pigs, and then that generation has the power of their mind stolen from them, and then they have to start on a new generation, which, don't get me started about that, because I would get on my soapbox and start ranting. You don't want that.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned when you first started homeschooling is that you realized that parents had sovereignly been given by God the right to train, not only the right, but the responsibility to train their children. I've been homeschooling. So we started in the late 90s, got really going in the early 2000s. And one of the things I've noticed is, so in the last 8 years, 10 years, we've started being a publisher ourselves, and you also publish homeschooling curriculum. So I know you see the trends. The trend I feel like I'm seeing is that in the 80s and 90s, homeschooling parents were told, you are smart enough, you can do this. In fact, it is your job given to you by God Almighty. Now I see the trend as, we are here to help you. You're not really smart enough. You took your kids out of the public school, but you don't really have a good education yourself. So let us help you. What happened to you can do it and it's your job? Do you see that happening in education too, and homeschooling?
Yeah, yes. And, I think it is a little bit of a troubling trend, because it reinforces this idea that there's a perfect curriculum out there. And if we just keep trying them, we'll eventually hit on the perfect one, and the thing about homeschooling, look, curriculum is the least factor that influences how your children turn out and whether they turn out educated or not. Do you believe that's true? Curriculum is the least factor.
Amen. If for no other reason than every single child is unique in so many ways, how would you ever find this perfect curriculum? If you did find it, then you're going to have another baby, and that baby won't fit the perfect curriculum. That's been my experience.
And, the perfect curriculum is created by imperfect people. I'm sorry, the logic doesn't flow. We were just talking about algebra, that doesn't work. So, every curriculum, mine and yours, has flaws. I'm sorry.
It does.
It's just the
fact. I could tell you where they are.
But so your success doesn't depend on the perfect curriculum. The thing that matters more than anything else is the one-on-one parent interaction with the child. In other words, you, homeschool mom and homeschooling dad, are the number one influence on your child and determining factor on whether they will grow up educated, whether they will grow up with the power of their mind and the ability to think critically and all of those kinds of things. A grandmother can sit with her grandchild on her lap and just reading the Bible, and you run your finger, I don't know if you can see my finger, like this under the words as you're reading. And you do that every day. And in 2 years, your child will be able to read every single thing that is in that Bible, even though you didn't spend 1 minute teaching phonics. You didn't spend 1 minute teaching sounding out words. You didn't spend 1 minute teaching anything. Just reading with your finger underneath. That's one of the things I learned as a new homeschooling mother. I would read these stories of the grandmothers who taught their grandchildren how to read. And that's what they did, you know?
Amen.
And I mean,
so how are your kids? Do you feel like they graduated? With a good education? Did
yes.
it work?
Yes, my kids are smart. You know, I'm not trying to brag, but they learned to read early on. They were reading college level books and adult level books in junior high and high school. And by adult level, I mean, you know, popular science magazine,
right.
that kind of stuff.
Well, if you had any of Ken Ham's books on your shelf, and the books that they published, those are adult level. And they are not easy to read. I think they're fun, but they're not watered down.
Well, and I was always, you know, the greatest book in the world is the Bible. It's also the hardest book in the world, you know, because you can read it and not understand what you're reading. I mean, you can understand some things on one level, but of course there's levels of truth and wisdom in every biblical passage. And you can read it every day. It's the only book in the world that's a living book. And by living book, I'm not talking about Charlotte Mason living books. I'm talking about words that are alive, living, and active that say something different by the power of the Holy Spirit to your heart in different seasons of your life, you know. And so it's the only book. It's the only words that are God breathed, you know. And so if you can sit down as a family and read that, the thing with our kids is we read that to our kindergartners. Do they understand everything that they've heard? No. Why do we keep doing it? Seeds. The sower sows the word, right? Whatever seed, you know, the Holy Spirit can quicken to a child's heart whatever he's heard, whatever's been planted in there. And if you read something to him when he was in kindergarten, and finally when he's 12 years old, he has some kind of a situation in his life, and the Holy Spirit brings that word to his remembrance, and he's like, oh, I get it now, you know.
Amen.
Well,
same thing with gaps in education. Can we not trust that the Holy Spirit will lead us to the right library book that day to randomly pick up some book, feels random, to give to our children, or some discussion that they start at the dinner table and then you go follow that little rabbit trail for a week or two? Can we not trust that the Creator who put that child in our house was educating our children with their own incredibly customized education plan? There's no such thing as a gap when we are depending on him.
That's true, because, and that's another good point that I want to bring out. And this goes back to the perfect curriculum. Trying to find the perfect curriculum can be overwhelming because, you know, what is there, 12, 18 subjects that, I mean, we feel like we have to teach everything to our kids. Listen, the point of education is not to convey to them everything that is to be known. That is not the point. What we need to do is teach the tools of learning to our children. There's 3 tools of learning. The Bible calls them knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. So knowledge is elementary age kids. What was said? When did this happen? What happened and when? You know, what are the math facts? What are the wildflowers in a square mile around my house? I mean, that kind of stuff is knowledge. Understanding happens in the secondary education, where they learn how A relates to B. And I mean, so there's that algebra and all that kind of stuff. Wisdom is for older, mature kids, high school and older, where you take what you know and how it apply and how it relates, and you apply it to your life right now. And so those 3 tools of learning, that's all we need to make sure our children get.
Mm-hmm.
If they get that, they can go on to teach themselves anything in the world that the Lord puts in front of them that they need to learn for their future life or career or whatever it is.
Amen.
So how do we teach those 3 tools of learning? Well, the Bible is foundational. It's key, because the Bible is full of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. I think math is key, because we have arithmetic, which is knowledge. We have algebra after that, which is analytical math. It's how one thing relates to another. Mm-hmm. And then you can go on to calculus or some of those other things, which is applied algebra to higher maths.
Or if they go into the trades, my son is an apprentice electrician, definitely applying algebra to making sure that they don't overload a line with current or whatever.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So then I think history is key, because history teaches wisdom and judgment, and you learn what happened. Then you go back and you learn how A related to B. How did Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg chapel door relate to the Renaissance and people questioning whether the Pope, whether the scriptures taught that the Pope was the be all end all in the church. And I mean, so there's those relationships. And then wisdom. What does what they went through? Because the Bible tells us there's nothing new under the sun, right? What has been is what will be. So if you know history, you can also be an amazing prophet, because you can tell what will happen. You can tell people what will happen in the world. And they're like, how did you know that? But that's wisdom, And then the other thing is language, phonics, spelling, being able to read. That's knowledge. Understanding the next level, that's learning to write. That's telling how A relates to B, And then wisdom, of course, is how you apply your ability to use language. So what are we called to do? Make disciples of every nation, right?
Share the gospel.
What are me and you doing in this video? We're communicating through words to give other people that might be listening, tools that they need in order to take the next step.
Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God.
Yes. And language, God is a God of his word. God is a God of language. Language is probably more important than math or history, because God speaks to us in language, and we speak back to him in language. We're language-oriented people. And so those 3 subjects teach the tools of learning just intrinsically in the process of going from step A to step B in all of them. And you don't have to teach them everything there is to know. And you don't have to have the perfect curriculum. I mean, you read out loud to your kids, you let them read, you sign books for them to read, you talk about what you're reading, you learn your phonics and learn your spelling and learn your diagramming sentences, which I think is crucial and essential for teaching how English works.
Amen. I do agree.
I taught all my kids how to diagram. I'm a big fan of diagramming. But, if you focus on the essentials, your children will turn out. They will graduate knowing the tools of learning and able to teach themselves anything else that they might need to know. I know that states mandate different subjects. You just have to keep your focus on what's vitally important. Never lose sight of that, and add what your state is requiring you as needed. But don't ever let that become your, be all end all.
Right, and make a difference between what is actually required in the law and what the local school is teaching. When we compare ourselves to another school with an entirely different set of reasons for why they're doing what they're doing, it just makes us miserable. It just makes us constantly fretting that I've been through all 50 states and the laws, and they're not really that difficult to hit. What is difficult is when we try to turn into our local school and tack the Bible on. Now we need to blow up the building. My husband has a famous thing that he says when he's teaching, what is repentance? Repentance is burn the house down and walk away. And that's what it is. We need to just burn it down and go straight back to what's really important. And that,
what is true education is not the same as what they're doing in public school. Kids that get educated in public school, and I'm not trying to make blanket statements here because I know there are some that are really good, but in general, public schools teach children, retard a child's education. And they're designed that way. Read any of John Taylor Gatto's books and you find out about it. Why did our schools change from Little House on the Prairie, one-room schoolhouse and homeschooling to these, factories where they get your kids for 8 hours a day and every 40 minutes the bell rings? And why have they been for 70, 80, 100 years gutting the curriculum of phonics and, understandable math and all these things? Years ago, they gutted history out of the curriculum and replaced it with social studies. Why? Well, history builds a framework, especially if you start at the beginning and you go through the end and you go chronologically to the end. You build a framework in your mind where everything that happened makes sense. It's got a relationship to each other. And it's when it gets to that point that history can teach you wisdom and good judgment, And so, but social studies, completely disjointed. 1 week you're learning about the Mayans and back in the 1200s, and another week you're learning about, the French and the French Revolution, which they don't teach anymore. They don't dare. But
it's true.
So disjointed all over the world, all over the place, all over, jumping back and forth to different time periods. And you learn about cultures and you don't learn what happened, and who did what. And so they skip the knowledge base altogether. And anyway, public education is designed to not educate your child. It's designed to let them receive whatever is fed into their brain and not question it. Basically, that's it. It's not a true education. So what we don't want to do what they're doing. We want to do what works, which is ditch the textbooks, ditch the 40 minutes and ring a bell, segregate everybody by the peer group and all that kind of thing. Those things do not truly educate our child. Let's do what works.
So I think if we want to keep the homeschooling movement legal, for one thing, in the United States, as we come into a new era where our freedoms are definitely being threatened. But beyond that, if we want to pass on truth to our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, any words of advice to leave us with how to, I guess I'm thinking that mom needs to stop thinking of it as open the curriculum and do what it says every day, but instead educate yourself, fall in love with learning yourself, get to a library, open the Word of God, just pour into you so that you have something to teach out to your children. But what advice do you have for keeping this heritage going so we can not lose what we've got?
Well, there's the natural side of it, which requires people that are called. And I know that this isn't everybody, but there are some people that are called to pay attention to what's going on in our state legislatures and whatever, the people that hate homeschooling are constantly trying to push through to limit. There are people that are called to stay on top of that stuff, and they have to keep doing what they're doing. Then we need to support them. There are people that are called to, instead of just leaving the school boards to somebody else, to go run for school board, to be involved in school boards, to even become teachers. There are people that are called to become teachers. And so those people that have those callings need to embrace those gifts and callings and do those things. And then we need to make an effort on the natural side to stay up. Most state homeschooling associations have a place on their website or whatever that are call to action. Bring your kids and come visit the Capitol and meet your legislatures and all that kind of stuff. We need to do those things. We need to be doing those things. But on the spiritual level, the fact of the matter is, especially with the background that we've had, and if we've come out of a public education ourselves, we are woefully uninformed. That doesn't mean that we're not able. It means we have to start giving ourselves knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And so if there's books that are recommended, like we've recommended some authors, we've recommended Ruth Beachick, we've recommended Dr. Raymond Moore, we've recommended John Taylor Gatto. If there are some authors that people that you respect, that know what they're doing, if they recommend, make a point to find that book, get it on audiobook or whatever's the best way for you to hear it, and start reading, start listening, start hearing it. And then don't ever, ever, ever let go of your Bible habit, your quiet time habit, whatever it is. After I had kids, after I got born again, I had this very strict Bible reading and prayer time habit every day that I'd set aside an hour a day for. And after I had kids, where I was up in the middle of the night nursing and exhausted constantly, and I'm like, okay, this isn't working. I would get up and I'd get in my prayer closet and I'd wake up 55 minutes later because I'd spent the whole entire time sleeping. That's when you adjust. You read 5 minutes a day. And you talk to God while you're washing the dishes and hanging the laundry.
Amen.
It took me a while to learn. But anyway, you don't, it might change in the different seasons of your life, but you don't ever let go of those things. And if your husband, my grandfather, who was born in 1900, they, every night when they ate dinner, the kids would clear the table and then they would sit back down at the dinner table and nobody left until he had opened the Bible and read the Bible reading for that day. And he was responsible. He read to the family. And there's no reason why we can't do that. There's probably a lot of people that are doing that. And fathers, if you're doing that, way to go. I'm so proud of you, but that's so necessary. And, kids will get their Bible, daily Bible, excuse me, that way if they don't get it any other way. And, so we are a work in progress. We're constantly learning, but we have to recognize that we need to learn some things and pursue those things. And I know it's hard. I know your time is at a premium when you're trying to do all this other stuff. And sometimes the only way to do it is ask God to help you find a way, and he can give you ideas. I had an idea for a project I was supposed to work on several months ago. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm ever going to have time for that. And then last night I had a dream where I was working on this project, and I got up this morning and I'm like, God was telling me it's time to start working on that project. And I just started working on it. And you do what you can every day, and the next and whatever, the next day you do some more. You don't give yourself these artificial
deadlines,
and so that you can feel bad if you don't make it. Just do like the one room schoolhouse. Just do what's in front of you today, and tomorrow pick up where you left off, and that's all you have to do. And you'll keep going that way.
Amen. 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 And if you're in a state where it's required for 180 days, well, then just keep a journal. Write down what you did that day with your kids. Write down, just a couple notes. It helped me. We lived in a state one time where we did have to keep track of things like that. And it just divide up a piece of paper with, your language arts, your math, your science, your history. And if you have a discussion on those things, write it down to say that you did something, but otherwise, no worries about following a curriculum. If you get through 80 days of a curriculum in math and 95 days in this subject and 103 in that subject, that's great. And then the next year, start on day 104 and just keep going. And don't worry.
And that's something that I learned because my sister-in-law is a teacher in public school. And when I started homeschooling, I did not know that the public school teachers don't get to the end of their curriculum either.
They don't. That's very true. My husband was a teacher.
And they do what they can, and then the next year they start again at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you another little secret public school teachers do, because my husband taught for 12 years. They take their state standards and they get them usually in a binder at the beginning of the year. And typical for public schools, they change them every year and they put different codes on. So the poor teachers have to find the new codes every year. So they've got them in this binder and they just put a big X when they've accomplished that standard. They're not going from point A to point B. They're just going, oh yeah, oh, okay, we did that. They're doing exactly what we're doing, Christine. A real teacher who has real time constraints and a life outside of teaching has to do that. So,
yes.
Anyway, it's
I want to add one more thing, and this is something. When I started, I followed the public school schedule, and we were so burnt out every spring. I didn't want to keep going. What I started to do was get off the public school schedule. And so I did 36 weeks of school. That was our state requirement. And so I did 6 weeks of teaching and then a week off. Complete week off where we didn't do anything but sleep or get caught up on the laundry or cook and put food in the freezer or whatever it was, do my grading and do a little planning for the next. And then I would do the next 6 week block and take a week off, because the biblical pattern is 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, right? So I figured if we did 6 weeks of work and then 1 week of rest, we'd be following a biblical pattern. When I switched to that pattern, we stopped getting burnt out, because we always, no matter where we were, we always had that week that was coming up that we could plan to go on a trip or go to the zoo or go visit the grandparents or whatever it was, and we didn't have to say, well, in the summer, 6 months from now in the summer, hold that thought because we'll do that,
No, I agree. Amen.
That'll help.
Amen. Thank you, Christine. I appreciate all of the wisdom that you've given to people today. And I hope they will go check out your website, because you have made these books. It didn't just end at the 13 colonies. You've got it from Genesis 1 and creation. It goes through the Greeks and the Romans and the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And there's more coming. I know you always have projects in the back burner. Yeah. So yes. So it's just a simple way to just read and enjoy with your children. And All Through the Ages is a fantastic book still that you can. I have people write me, what's a good book to read with my children? Well, get her book, All Through the Ages, and choose something from it and then discuss it together as a family. And that's my answer. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, that saved my life as a young homeschooler. And I think it's helped a lot of people.
Well, thank you. And may we have many, many years of homeschooling in our country. And, unless Yeshua returns, and then may it go into his kingdom and we see, without all of the problems we have, that will be an amazing time to see what education does then. But
it will.
So,
look forward to that day.
Amen. All right. Thank you. Yeah, you are very welcome. Thanks for sharing. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.